Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. We appreciate you spending some time with us. We have a great discussion in store. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi again, Alain.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Well, we have some big news we're going to be talking about just a little bit later on from Waymo today. Really looking forward to that. But first, we have some great guests with us. What will become of car dealerships as autonomous mobility services evolve and grow, along with electric vehicles, which need far less maintenance? We have the right people here to dive into those issues with us. Sheldon Sandler is a pioneer who created the first IPO in the dealer community, founder of Air Partners and consultant to many dealerships. And Glenn Mercer is a researcher who has served as the NADA's special consultant on the future of car dealerships. Sheldon and Glenn, really happy to have you with us.
We're happy to be here.
So nice to have you. Thank you.
Let's start out with a snapshot, maybe, of the health of car dealerships in the U.S. today. Sheldon, you want to get into that first?
Well, believe this or not, car dealers are experiencing the perfect storm. There's been because of the shutdown of the factories, there's not been enough product out there in dealer lots. So they're getting great margins on new cars, but because there's not enough product out there, not enough inventory, used cars have been the big winner. And the profitability of used cars has been soaring. As you might have seen, the performance of all the dealerships, but particularly, for example, Carvana, which is a used car idea and a unique way of marketing online. And that's just, what's the market cap of Carvana? Like $60 billion or something? Absolutely unimaginable. And
are they the ones with vending machines?
Yes, that's the vending machine. On top of that, car dealers have been able to right-size their expense structure, because car dealers are somewhat unique in that they don't have much fixed expense. They have a variable expense structure, so they can whittle their expense structure to meet the times. So the profitability has soared thanks to reduced expenses and terrific margins on new and used cars. So it's been, I think all the earnings season for the car dealers, the public car dealers, is just what is it, the past week or so have demonstrated profitability beyond what Wall Street anticipated. So dealerships, at least as they stand right now, have been extremely profitable.
Glenn, you want to comment on that?
Sheldon's absolutely right. It's been bizarro world in a way, in that around April or so. And first, I got to do one piece of boilerplate. You introduced me as a consultant to NADA, the National Auto Dealer Association, with its unfortunate acronym, which is correct. But my comments in this entire podcast will be my own, not representing NADA, the national level, or the state associations at the state level. Okay, boilerplate out of the way. As Sheldon's exactly right, it has been bizarre. Around April, we had people thinking it's time to close the dealership doors and walk away. And now we're in a position where front-end gross margins, that is how much I pay, and we're talking new car here, okay? I know people mentioned Carvana, but the main topic, I think, of this conversation is the franchise new car dealers, the 18,000 of them, not the 35,000 independent used car dealers, but we can talk about them too. But for those new car dealers, their front end gross margin, which is how much I paid for the car versus how much I sold it, is at highs that we maybe haven't seen since the 1990s. And Sheldon's exactly right again. The reason for this is the factories shut down in March, April, May, and even June. So inventory dried up. And it turns out that the American demand for cars is really strong. And so we have now hit average transaction prices that have never been seen before. I think we're at $37,000, Sheldon.
37.5.
Right? That's the average new car and truck. Of course, it's much lower for cars than trucks. The average new car sells probably in the high 20s. The average pickup truck, America's luxury vehicle, sells for probably 50 something. But average together are like 35, 36, 37,000. There's another piece in there, and Sheldon mentioned. So on the front end, the gross margin we have to work with, and then it's a matter of deducting expenses from that to get to our profit. And as Sheldon mentioned, dealers have been able to run more lean with their biggest expense, which is payroll, labor. Again, we laid everybody off in March, April, and May. And then as we brought people back on, sales staff in particular back on, we found that with customers demanding and dealers providing, whatever you want to call it, touchless, low touch, online only, internet selling, whatever, that we could use a much smaller sales force to sell the same number of vehicles. The average sales per car, new car sales per month for the average salesperson at a dealership has been 10 for the last 35 years. I kid you not, no productivity growth at all. And now it's come up way higher than that to like 16 or 17. I think part of it is we just hired back all the best salespeople, and the other ones are still leaving in the pool. The other part is when you go digital, salespeople can go from serial to parallel processing. So if you walk into a dealership and there's a salesperson and you say, okay, I want to buy a car, that salesperson then, of course, attaches himself or herself to you very closely and follows you around for the next 2 or 3 hours, and you either get the sale done or not. But when you have online sales, the salesperson can pivot from the email from customer A to the text from customer B. And so they're really making moving more metal at higher prices, as we just said, for less time. So that reduces labor costs, and that's helpful. There's one other thing I got to mention. I'll stop this monologue, and we don't have data on this yet, but it seems to be emerging. And this is one of those be careful what you wish for, America, things, which is the amount of haggling seems to have dropped. That is, when people go online to buy things, they somehow don't think it's appropriate now to argue the price. So the average customer who went physically at a dealership 5 years ago would have said, can you knock another $500 off this so I can get this sold? My spouse is watching, he or she's got to see me, being diligent about price. It's like online, it's click, click, and yeah, that's fine, I'll take it. Because when was the last time you haggled with Amazon? So Amazon has trained people, you do not haggle online. Of course you can, but if we add up together, low inventory, driving availability down and therefore prices up, a decrease in haggling, and an improvement in sales force productivity, dealers are doing very well. Yeah.
Glenn, we should mention also.
Let me ask just a question on that. The thing that online allows you to do is compare prices a heck of a lot easier than going from one dealer than another. Mm-hmm. And so the comparative price doesn't work unless there's collusion in the market that makes sure that, in fact, everybody offers the same price. Now, I'm certainly not accusing anybody of collusion. I mean, of course not. How do the dealerships maintain diligence to not, undersell each other to try to make the sale? Or hasn't that dynamic worked its way in there? Because I don't know, it doesn't, as you mentioned, Amazon is so damn big, there's nobody Congress may deal with that. Any thoughts on those ideas?
Yeah, two thoughts, and then I'd like to hand it over to Sheldon for his input.
Please. Thanks.
One is the price bands have collapsed with the internet, even before 2020, right? The era of selling 9 cars at $12,000 and then getting a sucker to pay $17,000 for the 10th one doesn't happen anymore. The internet has really narrowed price bands. So there's less room for negotiation otherwise, in general anyway. And then secondly, dealers have, usually provided by third-party vendors, a fire hose of data coming in constantly every single day saying, in your market, yellow convertibles are currently at this price. So they can see all their competitors. It's usually aggregated data by services from Cox Automotive or something. So they're very aware. It's a little bit like gas stations. It's like, look across the corner. Okay, you're at $1.99. I'm at $1.98. Okay, we'll stay there. Price discovery is pretty easy, both for the customer, of course, and for the dealer as well. And I lied because I have a third point. The other thing to point out, of course, as you're probably aware, the dealer tends to make more money on the back end than the front end. So the front end margin, which is important, is not what it used to be for car dealers. Payments directly from the OEM, monthly, quarterly, or annually, tend to, for the average dealer, provide more of the new car profit than the margin does. Back to Sheldon.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, one thing that's not very well known is dealers are rewarded in various ways. The more product they sell, the more the manufacturers like them. And in some cases, they actually, as Glenn was saying, they might get bonus money if they hit certain targets. So
one thing that hasn't changed is always buy at the end of the month or buy at the end of the year. That is very true still.
Right. That's what's happened. Right. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Glenn, was that, and we neither of us mentioned this, is that interest rates have also helped the dealers. They may not have a big fixed cost, but they do have mortgages, and which is a big expense for them. Their facility expenses, their biggest investment, and their inventory is their second biggest investment. And thanks to interest rates, it's been once again a perfect storm for them.
And the interest rates helps the buyer. It helps the buyer too, because the buyer is out there, looking at what they're going to pay per month. They get to make a little bit better margin on doing the financing on it and all the things, right? Or those don't play.
It's a self-reinforcing ecosystem, such that when things are on the upswing in automotive in the United States, they go together, and when they are on the downswing, they go together too as well. So you already mentioned used cars. So think of the virtuous circle here from a dealer perspective. We don't have as many new cars because the factories were closed. So we bid up the price of new cars. Because we don't have more expensive new cars, the used car market takes off as people say, well, I can't afford a new Camry, I'll get a 3-year-old used one. Now we bid up the prices of used cars. Now a new car buyer says, hey, I'm going to get $1,500 more for my trade-in than I otherwise would have. The new car is more affordable, and it just kind of circles around and circles around. It works the other way in a downturn, of course.
Well, America's great, isn't it? I mean, as long as you're on the on the right side of that curve, right?
It is definitely a K-shaped recovery, though, for sure, because we are not seeing the same pattern for the used car side. I mean, the used car prices are up, but I think, unfortunately, we are in a recovery which is exacerbating income and wealth differences. I think we're really moving to a world, not immediately, but steadily and slowly, year by year, where cars will look like the housing market. Rich people will buy new build and everybody else will buy used. The average age of a new car buyer in the United States is 55.
Wow.
Glenn, you just
so most people all through their 20s, 30s, and 40s are buying perfectly good used cars. Back to Sheldon.
Glenn, you just explained something to me. I took one of our Porsches into the dealership to get
one of our Porsches.
Oh, geez.
There you go.
You got to remember, I'm a car nut. So, and there was no new inventory at the Porsche dealer.
Yeah.
Which was almost shocked me. But you just explained it. People have wealthy people have nowhere else to put the money, so they're out there buying Porsches, right?
Right. Well, they haven't been spending money on travel for the past 6 months. Right? It's piled up savings. Anyway, sorry, that was a macro point.
Well, I was gonna ask you both about the impact of the pandemic here and the so many people being out of work, but you're saying that the car sales are up. So it's this. There's a real division then.
We know
People who
unemployment
can
rates,
afford it and people who
we
can't.
know white collar unemployment rates are that's still where they were in last year, right? Very few white collar people with high incomes have been laid off. All the unemployment is in blue collar, restaurant wait staff, et cetera, et cetera. There's good data on this from Raj Chetty and others. So, so if you take wealthy people, the average income of a new car buyer is well over $100,000 family household income. If you say, A, you haven't lost your job, B, you've been spending less money because you haven't gone anywhere, C, interest rates are low, you buy a car. But yeah, for the blue collar population, things look much differently. But again, we didn't have people earning, $31,000 a year coming into new car dealerships.
Well, you said something in that people aren't going anywhere. So a lot of people aren't driving very much. They're not even driving to work in many cases now.
I meant we're not taking expensive vacations to the south of France. And
but,
if you save
but
that
it's also true that there's less driving, isn't it?
Hasn't VMT gotten pretty much close to recovery? Maybe
it's gotten close. The amazing thing was that even in the downturn, the VMT didn't go down all that deeply. Some of that VMT also includes trucks. And what happened in throughout the pandemic, one of the things that continued to operate well, I claim, I think there's supporting evidence of that, is the logistics system. I mean, there was food still on the shelves. I mean, that whole system didn't collapse. Otherwise, we would have ended up, I think, in much worse shape than we were. So I think both, societally and everything else. So that piece of the economy continued on unabated and maybe even increased. And in some sense, if you even take it to the airline industry, if you look at what happened in the airline industry, while they weren't moving people, they were much more air freight. So there was more air freight being moved during that, which certainly helped in terms of making sure that, at least we were fed.
To Fred's point, though, and your point as well, though, we do have to look at VMT more carefully. So vehicle miles traveled has rebounded strongly, but you're right that quite a bit of it that rebound might not be personal miles traveled, as in commuting to work or going to the grocery store, but millions of people delivering DoorDash trips. So that still counts as a vehicle miles traveled, but it might be a commercial delivery as opposed to an individual trip. One thing I think is really fascinating is emerging literature on work from home, because I think the assumption was, as we move to more and more work from home, which seems to be happening, right? I'm not an expert there, is that vehicle miles traveled will drop. And it's the mixture of academic researches on this is inconclusive. It looks like giving up your commute to work a few days a week doesn't necessarily cut down your miles traveled. As you do more errands or drive, let's take the banal stereotyped commute of I drive into downtown Boston to my workspace and then I drive home at night. Now I don't do that. I work from home. Don't I save 20 miles? Yeah, but when you were in Boston, maybe you just went down the elevator to the food court to get lunch, and now you drive to the McDonald's to get lunch or something. So oddly enough, we haven't seen yet conclusive evidence that work from home is going to really whack VMT. Personally, what I think might whack VMT, which might boost VMT, which we, again, have to untangle, is the decline of air travel. You only have to give up a couple of, round trip flights, taking the kids to the Grand Canyon, replace that with a car trip to really drive miles up again. But I wandered off the point again. Sorry.
Yeah,
You
no,
really gotta
no,
rein
that's,
me in, Fred.
but those are good points. Those are
Mhm.
actually very good points. There's also the point is which mass transit is way down,
Oh,
and
poor
so
mass transit, yeah.
mass transit, not that it was very big. It was only 4% of the trips before. Now it's whatever. But mass transit is really in trouble. And in fact, who knows how many of those people went out and bought used cars because they didn't want to do whatever. There's been some anecdotal comments about that. One needs to get real data on it, but the data that's been put out by INRIX, who sits there and basically does what I think a really good job of getting a very good sample of vehicle miles traveled. I mean, when I looked at it, I was shocked at how little it went down. Just from running around Princeton, I thought, hey, nobody's in their cars anymore. It wasn't true. Yeah. I mean, so
the car is the ultimate social distancing device, right? What used to be a bug is now a feature.
I mean, they're going to political rallies in cars and sitting around and whatever. I mean, then you think about, oh, my goodness, what the heck's going on? Whatever. Yeah.
Drive-in rallies, right?
I'm a car guy, but I'm going to get on a mass transit soapbox briefly. Again, push the nuclear button, Fred, if I go too far here. But I think mass transit is vital for the lower classes of America in particular. I know that sounds condescending, but we got to do a better job at providing the mass transit options. Yeah. And all I can say is, and I follow a lot of mass transit pundits, is buy more buses. Politicians love to stand in front of a light rail project and cut a ribbon or something like that. But for the people who have to go to work and have no choice to get to the nursing home where they're an attendant or something, move the buses from 3 times an hour unpredictably to 7 times an hour. And you can do an amazing amount of improvement to mass transit quality by getting away from the gigantically expensive capital projects and just put buses on. But no politician wants to stand up there and say, hey, a lot more buses on the road, vote for me. But boy, that would do amazing things for mass transit, I think.
Let me jump on, and I want to jump on that because I certainly
piling up the soapboxes here.
I agree with you absolutely on that, but I take it one step farther. I mean, to me, that's the reason to do driverless. It's the only reason to do driverless, is because all of a sudden with driverless, you have the opportunity to deliver high quality mobility at an affordable price. All you got to do is try to get a couple of people in a bus. You can't, if you have to pay for the bus driver, you almost can't afford it unless we decide to put a whole heck of a lot more money into it, or take all of that capital money that we were going to put into some who knows what system, rail system, and then really pay the drivers. But to really get mobility out there to folks, that's the way to do it. But at least that's my soapbox. And,
right.
Anyway, Sheldon, you jump in too. What's your soapbox on this one?
No, I was thinking about what you said, and it reminds me, in my college days, I used to work in summers in Atlantic City. And they had a really good solution to what Glenn's talking about. They didn't have buses. They had what they called jitneys, which are, they run them in airports, right? But in Atlantic City, you never had to worry about getting transportation, because they would come, like Glenn was saying, every 10 minutes or so you could hop on a jitney.
Yeah, and
imagine if they were autonomous jitneys, which shouldn't be a big problem, right?
Sure, and then absolutely, in places where you have enough density for that, you absolutely do that. But in our communities, like I say, in Trenton, New Jersey, my goodness, we don't have that kind of density. But we could have vehicles out there that just move people around and be able to do it. So anyway, great.
Well, I think we've shifted gears, as it, like Sheldon with his Porsche. So what about this evolution to autonomous vehicle services? The car manufacturers are talking about it big time. So what is that going to mean for dealers?
That's a specialty of Glenn's. You want to comment on this, Glenn?
You're muted, Glenn.
I thought it was a good prophylactic thing there to be muted. Yeah. By the way, on the autonomy front, and I lob this out there at the risk of totally sidetracking the discussion in a different direction. But as we were talking before this podcast started, Waymo essentially came out with, a massively impactful story that they might be able to get their self-driving, or I hesitate to use driverless, whatever is the correct phrase.
Driverless. Let's use driverless in this program.
Driverless software out on the road in other OEMs' cars very quickly, or quicker than we thought, or they've advanced further than we thought, however you want to phrase it. And about the same time today, or yesterday, I think, Tesla announced they were upping the cost of their FSD, full-size self-driving thing, which we have arguments about the terminology there, to $10,000 an option. So it's interesting to see that right now, and I know watching the stock market for any short period of time is a fool's game, but Tesla stock is down 6%, down by $23. And I think it might be people realizing that the FSD revenue model might be harder to pull off if big competitor Waymo is closer to market than we thought with an alternative. I don't know that, but Tesla stock is down $23, and that's surprising. Okay, so
can I interrupt you for a minute? Let me
Please.
put this in context for people who aren't familiar with this community. There are about 17,000 car dealerships in this country. Less than 10% are owned by public companies, the Auto Nations, the Group Ones. So it's this community. Your local dealership is most likely going to be owned by a private individual, a private family. And typically, Glenn, you're probably more familiar with the statistics than I am, but I would say the average car dealership gross revenue is in the $30 to $40 million range. And the bottom line, maybe $500,000 on average, maybe a bit more than that today. And this has been relatively static now for how many years? 10 years or so? And the last big downturn in car dealership ownership was in the 2008 financial collapse. But we have had a rather steady ownership. The public consolidators occasionally will buy some dealerships, but it's been pretty much static up until now. And let me make one further comment before I turn it over to Glenn. Dealers tend to look at their business 1 month at a time. They don't look 5 years down. They're very reactive to the immediate circumstances of their business, and they're not future thinkers typically. And with that, I'll turn it over to Glenn.
So what about the idea then, Glenn, of this shift to mobility services that some of the manufacturers are talking about? I mean, we had Ford on with us a week ago chatting about that.
Right. First of all, just to update on the statistics, the average dealership revenue is about 60 million. Not this year, because we had some bad months in there, but about 60 million, about $5 million a month. Sheldon's absolutely right. It's like 17,500. Our peak was 55,000 in the mid 50s. We were sort of 20,000 before the Great Recession, and then with the bankruptcies of GM and Chrysler, that broomed about 2,000 dealers out. We're at about 18,000. And mea culpa, I've been wrong for the last 10 years, expecting that number to drop, and it just doesn't drop. I think it's related to the suburbanization of America. As a greater and greater fraction of the population of America lives in the burbs, you just need the geographic coverage of dealers, but that's a separate topic. So, but Sheldon's right on the magnitudes and the size. By the way, now I'll just do a dealer promo here a little bit. in average small town America or small town suburban areas, the new car dealer may be the last man or woman standing in terms of locally owned private businesses. The restaurants have been wiped out by the chains. The local hardware store has been killed by, Home Depot. The local newspaper, nobody's even heard of those anymore. They tend to be kind of the pillar of the community, last person out there. So it's an interesting thing to note. Okay. AV. Okay, let's get the terms right here. So autonomous vehicles, and you said mobility services. I'm going to address the two of them separately, actually, because while they are overlapping and conflate, they are not the same thing. Uber and Lyft are not AVs, but a robo-taxi, wonderful term, is an AV that does mobility services, right? Okay, so what is the impact of a rising number of AVs on dealers? We want to talk about that first. The first question, I guess, is, are they privately owned or fleet owned? The assumption has been for a decade now that they will be too expensive to be owned by individuals. They will be owned by fleets. That's the assumption. I would like to push back on that a little bit and say it's kind of interesting that AV enthusiasts are talking in two contradictory directions, in that they say the cost of making a vehicle autonomous is falling and falling, but they will be too expensive to be individually owned. So I think there may be, just like there is a market out there for frustrated Mercedes station wagon buyers. What's a station wagon anyway, Alan? I never heard of that.
Mercedes still makes one. No.
I don't know what that is. Anyway,
I'm going to get to you. I'll get back. I'll get back to you.
It's been decreed by the powers that we're all going to drive crossovers. I don't know what happened there, but it's just an amazing stampede. But imagine, so if you think that the average household buying a new car is at $105,000 of income now, and by 2025, when these things are more available, is like at $120,000. Do you really think that they may not be able to afford a $15,000 upcharge on an AV to buy their own personally owned AV? I don't know the answer.
Well, one of the big issues there, if I can interrupt, Glenn, is not just the cost of the technology, but it's the liability involved. And we talk about that a lot, Alan. Who's responsible if there's an accident, if the vehicle is self-driving?
I don't agree with all the other people that say they're going to be too expensive. I think you have to, the responsibility associated with owning one of these things, that you're going to put it out there without anybody in it, and it's going to go pick up your dry cleaning and bring it back home to you. The goofy thought that it actually, the driverless piece, we're just too irresponsible for that. We don't maintain our vehicles well enough, and I don't think Mike Scrutato or anybody else is going to sell us insurance to do that. And certainly the manufacturer isn't. Elon hasn't said, I'm responsible for full self-driving if anything happens. He has not said that. He's pointed to the small print, says, you're responsible. You turn the thing on, it's yours. Holy hell. I mean, you don't want to put that in my hands. I mean, I'm gonna be a goop. Talk to me, Glenn.
Okay. I don't know what percentage of driverless cars will be owned by individuals as opposed by fleets. But to answer your question into two parts, for the part of AV sales that are owned by individuals, I think there's no real impact on the dealer. Now it's just a car with an additional suite of features, which means you can drive yourself somewhere and have sex in the back seat while you're going there. For those, it'll just be a car, additional features, sold by a dealer, maintained by a dealer. So set that aside. If you think that
responsible, the dealer will be also responsible if I'm in the back seat. Who's responsible if the thing goes bang and I'm in the back seat?
I don't know. I follow, what's his name, Brian Foster, whatever, at University of South Carolina on this. I don't know if it's going to...
Brian Walker Smith. Walker Smith.
That's it.
Yeah.
I guess it would be a blended model where if you're in AV mode, it's product liability of the OEM. And if you're in manual driven mode, it's your car insurance. But I don't know.
So let me ask you a question here.
Hmm.
Do you think any dealer or manufacturer will take responsibility of that vehicle if I'm in the back seat?
I don't know. I just don't know.
I mean, it's going to have to be, the probability that thing crashes has to be essentially zero. I mean, really zero. And I'm the one that's maintaining it. I'm the one that decided to turn this thing on. Really, somebody is going to have that much faith that I'm not a total screwball? That it just seems to me such a huge hurdle.
There was an article out just recently, I can provide a link to it, showing that one of the big problems in testing AVs right now is mayflies clogging the sensors. So does this mean that, the person who is going to be driven in the driverless vehicle each day before they start up is supposed to clean all the sensors? Whose liability is that, right? What do you mean you put a bumper sticker over the ultrasonic sensor? Well, sorry, I just did it, I don't know how to approach the liability issues. They're just incredible.
Well,
but leaving that aside,
the issue, Glenn, about if this model shifts the way some car makers are seeing it to mobility service.
Right. So
What role? What role do you see dealerships playing?
So let's pretend there's 100 driverless cars sold in 2025. 10 of them are sold to private individuals. I think the impact on dealers there is relatively minimal, but mostly upside. More expensive vehicle is more margin, and an autonomous vehicle will be driven more miles, and that's more service revenue. Let's take the other 90% then. If we think it's 90%, that's fleet sales, robo-taxis, to some future descendant of Uber or WeWork or something, where it's a mobility service, driverless.
Or
vehicle.
Waymo One,
Waymo One. Yeah, I think if Waymo's smart, they'll only sell the software to OEMs and stay out of the car business themselves.
Of course. Yeah, why they already decide that? They gave up on the Firefly, I think.
Yeah, Kraftchick is no dummy. So that may answer the reliability question for you right there. I don't know. Anyway, but these are now sold to fleets. What does it mean for dealers? Well, dealers probably now lose the front end margin because it's more like a sale to Hertz. And as your listeners are probably aware, if a dealer, most rental cars, and I remember rental cars, maybe they come back. Most rental cars are actually sold to say like a Hertz via a local dealer who would take a very small handling fee, not a real margin or something like that. Okay, so the front end margin collapses. They also don't get financing income on this because Uber or whatever is going to bring its own financing to bear to finance these vehicles, and not just going to do individual bank loans one by one and spiff the dealer $1,000 or something. So that's bad. Where I think there's more uncertainty is who does the maintenance. These will be high maintenance vehicles. We come back again to Alain's concerns about liability. Assume we have high liability here, right? Because I don't want to get too morbid, but the first time a driverless vehicle is thrown at fault and has run over a child, all hell will break loose.
Yes, okay? Of course, absolutely.
Hindenburg kind of moment. So I am going to guess that whatever fleet is running these things, they want them impeccably maintained.
Absolutely.
A little bit like aircraft are maintained.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And the question, and various people say, I'm the one who's going to do it. Well, I don't know if Uber. So let's take Uber driver taxi. So they say to themselves, I'm going to need to be able to check these cars once a week probably, and maintain them once a month. I'll need very skilled technicians and facilities to do that. Wait a minute, don't those already exist at dealers? Other people like Cox with their Pivot thing, P-I-V-E-T, said that they can use their auction sites as big, massive AV maintenance facilities. I don't know. If I'm Ford and I'm selling an AV to a fleet, might not require that fleet to bring it to my dealer, where I can control the training and the tool usage of the technician? So
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
So I'll wrap up in one sentence. So that is, personally owned AVs, I think, have minimal impact on the dealer. It's mostly possible. Fleet owned AVs, people are expecting them to really hurt dealers who will lose maintenance revenue. I'm not so sure. Sheldon.
Yeah, we can't skip this issue. Tesla does not use traditional privately owned car dealers. They sell direct to the consumer without our traditional dealer. But just this morning, they announced they're going to set up their own shops, their own back ends to their sales side. And it was a big number that they intend to establish on their own. So they're going to have their own fix-its. I think that has a pretty significant impact on your discussion.
Yeah, let's make sure we're clear what Sheldon just said. I hadn't seen that news item, but that's important.
It came out this morning.
In both cases, it's a OEM-controlled channel that does the maintenance. In one case, we're going to use local entrepreneurs to finance it, dealers. In the other case, we'll finance it ourselves, Tesla. But in both cases, it's controlled by the OEM who sold the driverless car, as opposed to saying, you know, Larry and Sergey's robotaxi fleet, you do the maintenance. Okay.
When you talk about the shift, not just with autonomous vehicles, many of them will be electric vehicles, but the overall move by car makers to building more and more electric vehicles, doesn't that impact the revenue, maintenance revenue at dealerships, because they take a lot less maintenance? Yeah,
2 or 3 points on this, on electric vehicles, because we've looked at this really carefully for the NADA study. A, it is pretty darn clear that EVs will require less maintenance than ICE, internal combustion engine. Don't have the engine, you don't have the radiator leak and stuff. You may have a battery coolant system, by the way.
No oil changes.
No oil changes, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely right, okay? And the numbers move around a lot. Let's call it a 50% drop, okay? So let's say if I were spending $600 a year maintaining my vehicle, now I'm at $300. This is bad for dealers. On the other hand, dealers have very high service retention on a few EVs that are out there. That is, if I have an EV, right now, American customers at least think, I'd better bring this back to the dealer, not to Alan's House of Wheels,
Come
weekend.
on.
Right. So what I always say to dealers is, these are very loyal customers. They're not spending as much as they were before, but every dollar they're spending with you. Do not lose these customers. So I think it'd be the dealer's own fault if EVs turn out to be a real hit to their service line, because right now, pretty much every Nissan Leaf is going back to a Nissan dealership, admittedly for less money per year, but don't lose it. The other point I'll make is the prediction is absolutely spot on. It'd be less revenue. On the other hand, dealers have been resilient to this prediction, because I remember back in the 80s, when people were saying car quality was getting so good that dealers were screwed because there wouldn't be any work to do in maintenance and repair. And warranty work kind of went away, right? It's a small amount. I don't know if you know, Sheldon, what percentage of the repair bays doing warranty work, but it used to be like 2/3 of the work dealers doing. Now it's going to be a fifth.
Dealers love customer pay, no doubt.
Customer pay, yeah. And dealers scrambled around and they started selling extended service plans and things like that, which lock you into the bays, et cetera, et cetera. I think, somehow I think that the net impact on the service revenue, if we, A, keep retention high, and then B, scramble around to, keep the customer linked in, I think we'll probably get through it.
What about battery?
The other thing to point out, of course, too, is battery swapping and
refurbishment
and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, because remember, we're talking about a fixed number of dealers at this point in time. It's been about 17,500 for about a decade or more. And if we have a growing population in the United States and a growing GDP and a growing fleet, dealers who might relatively get less EV service revenue might not actually see that in absolute dollars. So I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, but I don't think EVs sort of, wipe out dealers. The other thing too, of course, is it depends on your EV forecast, how fast they feather in. Imagine you're an incredibly bullish EV forecaster and you say by 2025, 10% of all vehicles sold will be EV. Okay, so that means 10% of 17 million, 1.7 million, there's probably 3 million on the road now, 5 million out of a total fleet of 290 million vehicles. It'll take a while to penetrate the dealer service department. If you're a pessimist, you say, boiling frog problem, they won't notice it until it's too late, but that might be 2035. Okay,
Terrific.
so
Really terrific, Glenn. Really terrific. I mean, seriously, because those are. I agree 100% with that perspective.
We'll continue in just a moment, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website there's a white paper that you should look for. It's called the Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, as you probably know, can be a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The site again is motoetf.com. Alain, we're going to turn to some headlines, and we welcome Sheldon and Glenn to join in commenting on these too. The big one today, Waymo pulls back the curtain on 6.1 million miles of self-driving car data in Phoenix. That's the headline from The Verge, and the story is out there today. And I know you played a little bit of a part in this as well.
Yes, I did have the privilege of previewing the release. I was under NDA to Waymo, and I've now been released from that non-disclosure. And I guess I can comment. I think this is really a breath of fresh air for the whole driverless community. The reason is because what's been in the safety reports to date have been sort of public relations announcements of what we're gonna do. This is the first time that real experience on what the performance of these systems has been in a real operational design domain under real services, providing the mobility that they're looking to provide. And I really appreciated the way Waymo put it out there. The way, at least when I read the report, I read it as if this report was being presented inside Waymo, inside a decision maker. This is how we've performed to date. Are we good enough to go out there and take the risk of providing the mobility in a driverless way so that we have the opportunity to provide it at an affordable level and deliver mobility out there to the public, which I think is the real value of the automation when we can take the driver out of there. You can think back maybe in 1945 when the decision was made to take the elevator operator out of elevators and make them automated. What did that do? That allowed affordable vertical mobility that allowed, buildings taller than 3 or 4 stories to be built and operated. It unleashed the opportunity to provide mobility to everybody. To me, that can only be unleashed if you take the driver out of there. Why? Because that's the expensive item. That's the variable cost item. That, if you have enough density and there's enough money to pay people to drive, fine, pay them to drive. But most of the trips that are made and the mobility that we want, there are only one or a couple of us that want to go at that time to that place, from that place. It's so diffuse that, of course, you have to be able to provide mobility that is diffuse. we've done that very well to the folks who can afford to own their own cars and are capable of driving their own cars. We do that in spades. We've done that beautifully for 120 years. But now how do we bring this to the folks who either couldn't afford it, couldn't do it, or too young, too old, or all the other things? And to me, what I found refreshing about what Waymo put out there was it read to me like an internal document, and was being presented to me as if I was about to be asked, do I think or do I vote to put this out there, when in fact I've put the ranch on the table, and if this doesn't work, I lose the ranch. And as I looked at it, I would vote yes.
So this is the kind of disclosure that you've been calling for a long time.
Absolutely. People say, disengagements are incorrect. Of course, disengagements by themselves. The question is, when you had somebody overseeing and they grabbed a hold, what would have happened? What you can go that you have simulations, you can do that. They went and basically report on every disengagement that they've had. They report on every crash that has happened to them in this time period and said, here's the situation. Okay. They've reported on every crash that they've had with a pedestrian. I guess the only one that they've had is when the pedestrian ran into them. Okay. And the vehicle was stopped. So the data that seems to be out there is sort of, to me, was the kind of data that one would hope one presents internally to the decision makers around the table that have to accept the responsibility. They can't say if something happens, hey, dog ate my homework. There's no dog that ate any available here. Or point to a list of requirements put by a regulator, check this box, that box, and that box. Nobody's put on box checkers, such that if I check the boxes, I can blame them. They have to accept the responsibility themselves. So they have to be able to see that, in fact, this is good enough. And I think that this is the way I read it. Now, maybe I read it wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a fan or something. I don't know, but I guess I'm not that much of a fan. But I hope everybody takes a look at that and comes up with it with their own decision on that, or they're appalled. How could they possibly do this? My goodness, they're going to kill my children. Don't come in my neighborhood. I don't know. That's the way I read it. And I think what's really nice about it is they put it out there like that. And I think that is really good.
I have nowhere near the expertise you have on AVs. And frankly, a large measurable portion of what I know about AVs is from reading your newsletter and following up on the sources. So yeah. I'm just going to chip in from the side.
Sure, please, dude. Please, Glenn. I appreciate it.
I forget who it was, which engineer said, after you do 90% of the work to build an AV, you have 90% left to go.
Absolutely. That is so true. That is absolutely true.
Because, there's two optics on the safety portion of things. The Silicon Valley optic is 40,000 Americans killed on the road every year. Humans are horrible drivers. The other end of the optic is one fatality for every 100 million miles driven. Humans are great drivers, and it's obviously both.
Of course.
And so Waymo seems, and that's why I think we've had so many AV startups, because you can get pretty damn close to self-driving pretty quickly.
Look, 15 years ago at Grand Challenge, man, we were down there going down the streets of Las Vegas without any hands on the wheel. Totally irresponsible.
Well,
but
go
ahead, go.
But yeah, and I think Waymo seems to be one of the very few that really has a shot at doing this. I mean, it's funny, everybody talks about AVs like it's some sort of startup industry, but Google's first driverless car was 11 years ago, I think.
Yeah, yes. In 2009 they started. It's been 11 years. Yeah.
Right. And so that just points out this is really, really hard. I think the problem gets solved, and Waymo's announcing this shows some real progress towards that solving. So, and I think, and I don't want to make this a Tesla phone call, and I don't think, I'm not going to weigh in on Tesla bull or bear, but it's fascinating to see that the confluence of Waymo's announcement of this progress and Tesla's announcement of raising the price of their FSD suite. I don't know if it's something else that happened, like, Grimes divorced Elon or something, but Tesla stock is down $26 today. And I think it might be the market saying, wow, there may be a rivaled FSD that from Waymo that will allow a lot of other car companies to quote unquote catch up to Tesla on the FSD side. Now, whether you think Tesla actually has a driver, I'll let you talk about that. But if you are a believer and think that Tesla's already there, this is announced that another behemoth is hot on the heels, ready to enable all the other OEMs. Maybe that's what's causing this decline. I don't know.
Yeah, of course, I don't think that. I think Tesla's done a really good job as long as you're behind a wheel, ready
Yeah.
to take over when the thing doesn't.
It's a great
But
ADAS.
in other words, it's might be at 90, it might be at 99%, but there's still an enormous way to go. What seems to be in this Waymo announcement is that in fact, in an operational design domain, and it's key to say within an operational design domain where they've had this thing operating with human oversight, the human oversight really did not contribute to making it safer. The damn thing was damn good by itself. And in fact, it sort of almost like I'd like to say maybe happened in 1945 again with respect to the elevator operator and the elevator operator strike. Oh my goodness, they went on strike, but the elevators still went up and down and the automated ones worked and we didn't need them. And all of a sudden, why do we need them? In some sense, that's where that corporate responsibility might be with what seems to be not data that's been cleaned up and made for public consumption. This seems to be straight out the information that one would want to have. Now, of course, I haven't looked at the data themselves. I don't know whether or not they faked it and so on and are lying and doing all the other. I don't believe. I don't think they were, but I haven't redone the analyses and relooked at them, but it looked to me like it was presented as you would present it internally, when you're not concerned internally. Is this good enough for me to accept the responsibility? It being on me now that this thing's going to work. I'm going to be the one that's going to have to pick up the pieces. It's all going to come to me. Okay. And it looks to me like, Jesus,
this is Sheldon.
Yeah, go ahead, Sheldon.
Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
The big question I've had about this whole effort by Waymo and everybody else is, and maybe Glenn can help me with this, where's the return on investment? How much has already been invested, for example, by Waymo? And whether they're a profit, ultimately you're doing, follow the money, right? Ultimately you're doing this to make a profit. So who's studied this? I mean, they must know how much it's going to generate for them in profits.
Well,
go ahead.
It's a tough one. I mean, I was speaking somewhat sarcastically, stealing Ed Niedermeyer's take that Tesla is the most successful autonomous vehicle company because it's been able to sell what it calls autonomous driving for good money, for hundreds of millions of dollars now, I think, even if they don't actually provide it either on time or at all. But leaving that aside, which is a trivial remark, that's the question here, and that is, let's say you get the robo-taxi to work. You take the driver out, and now it's cheaper. How does Waymo recoup 10 billion or whatever? Do they just write it off and say we'll run on marginal cost and revenue now, in which case the robotaxi will be cheaper? Or do they try to get some of that back? I don't see it.
Well, it's a huge investment, Glenn. I can't imagine
It's a huge investment. I think that some of this is preying on what Adam Jonas was saying, several number of years ago. That the mobility business is a $10 trillion a year business, and if it is a $10 trillion a year business, the question is how do you go into that business and what do you provide? Do you provide vehicles that then are the responsibility of us as individuals? We have to drive them. We have to put in our labor at zero cost. We have to maintain it. We have to insure it, and we have to do that. Or do you go out there and provide it as a service so that we pay for it? Which is a fundamental question. When I look at these things, the kind of numbers that I sort of throw around is that I look at the productivity of one of these vehicles as being able to maybe serve 50-person trips a day type of thing with respect to those things. And then the question is what kind of return on what can you charge for a trip versus what it's going to cost you per vehicle mile. The cost per vehicle mile of operating these systems and today's costs might end up long run capitalization, maintenance, and depending on if you do it well, maybe down as low as maybe 25 cents a vehicle mile, maybe 50 cents a vehicle mile, somewhere between those kinds of things. Do you get two people in there that are willing to pay, if you have to end up paying even, 30, 40 cents, 50 cents a vehicle mile, it's really on the margin quite good. And then, make 10 cents, make 15 cents a person mile. You look at the number of person miles and you're making 15 cents on them. The numbers add up, but it's a business that is drip, 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 drip from operating. Okay. From that operation, that's what it is. Now, can you set up your operation such that the labor input is small enough, such that it's really just fixed, that you're really just doing the amortization or the carrying costs of those things? It can. It's certainly, heck of a lot better than any transit company. The darn transit companies are so burdened by labor, so that it's everything is associated with labor. Now you have a thing that can just do it. Do you then want to move packages with it? Do you want to move Amazon's packages with this stuff between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. when you can do it easily, blah, blah, da, 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 and all the other kinds of things? Those fit into that. But it is a long run, drip, drip, drip business, as opposed to, hey, I make a big amount here, big amount there, big amount there. I don't know, Glenn.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know either. And all these projections are just so incredibly complicated and hard to do. One thing, for example, you already mentioned it, is, so let's say there's a robo-taxi out there at X cents per mile. And how do the analysts compare that now to an owned car? They inevitably compare it to a new car. But if the average American is buying a $12,000 4-year-old car, don't they see a different cents per mile? And then, as you already mentioned, we donate our labor for free. If Americans think I can redeploy the labor in the car to a more useful purpose, like Angry Birds or something, then that works. On the other hand, if they don't see it for free, soapbox number 37B, a lot of technological innovation over the past 10 years has been tilted towards making the customer do your work for you for free. We talk endlessly about, I can do all my car research online. I don't have to go to the dealer. Well, if you went to the dealer, there was a salesperson paid to do the research. Now you're doing it for free. Thank you. We save that money, check in online, hotel reservations online. Great. No more travel agent to do it for you. You do it for free. So Americans seem to tolerate an enormous amount of labor at $0 per hour. I don't know. That's why I keep wondering. And but I'm going to come back to one thing you haven't mentioned, but you have mentioned repeatedly in your work online and overall. I'm going to come back to it in a minute. That's why I wonder if Waymo's sitting there, do they say, maybe my road to profitability is selling the Waymo autonomous vehicle software and sensor suite for $25,000 as an upcharge on a Mercedes than dripping it through fleets. I don't know, but that's something that
that is a great point. And I don't. They haven't shown that indication, and then
exactly.
I end up really worrying about this responsibility thing. Now that I've sold it to you, I like selling you stuff as long as when you get it, it's your problem, no longer my problem.
Right.
Okay. The longer it's my problem is really, I mean, that is a really big expense that I have to bear, especially if I don't control it. You know, I mean, it's out there.
But the other thing, which you've mentioned a lot in the past, I do want to bring up here is for the blind and disabled, this thing is just incredible.
And the poor. Because then you can subsidize it. I mean, the subsidy that you have to provide to be able to provide mobility to the people in Trenton versus putting buses out there for which I have to, the labor is the big expense. Okay. I mean, you know, that's the thing that go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right there. There's issues then of pulling all the poor off Mercer's buses and putting them all on Alain's cars and clogging all the roads again. But you're right.
They deserve access to that. They deserve access to those roads as well as I deserve. No, go ahead. That's a social equity and whatever. We won't.
No, but there's at least three arguments for driverless. One is safety. Will they be safer? Okay,
sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
We debate about whether people will pay for that or not, but it's true.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
Convenience is another one. I'm
Sure.
the iBanker in the back, and I want to be able to do my email while on the way to Goldman Sachs. And the third one is social equity, broadly defined as blind people who have never been able to move around, disabled to some extent. I think part of the challenge on disabled is we forget the problems they have getting in and out of the car and being human again already anyway, but disabled. And then, the poor, though I think it is a very open question on where would the money be better spent? Would it be better spent on putting on 20 more buses and handing out free e-bikes than subsidizing robotaxis? I don't know.
That's worth. It's worth. Yeah.
And what about the elderly population?
And the elderly.
I was lumping them in with disabled, though at the age of 65, maybe I shouldn't be.
I'm not 65 yet, so you know I'm still 38 now.
We will have an increasing portion of the population in America being very elderly, and so robo-taxis might work very, very well for them. But right now they use shuttles and things like that already, and we already see the problems there of how do I get my wheelchair in and out? I have a walker. How do I get in and out of the car? And we've usually fixed that by throwing humans at it. There's an attendant there to help you in and out, or you get in the car and you're a little disoriented and you don't know where to tell it to go. And again, a human will say, "I'll just take you back home." You know, so I don't know if it'll be as easy for the disabled.
My argument on that is that we need support at where people get on and get off. Those are fixed supports. They don't have to be going between them, and therefore that can be. But that's a detail. Those are details on that. Those are appropriate issues with respect. This certainly has been a wonderful discussion. I can't thank you both enough. I think you've been very straightforward and very upfront with respect to the dealerships and the role here. And of course, I agree that all this is going to take some amount of time. It's not going to happen instantaneously. I mean, you know, we're still at zero on all these things. We barely started. It takes a while, but I think that there's continues to be opportunity here for dealers, and especially on the maintenance and the support of these fleets, however small or big they end up becoming. And the manufacturers of the vehicles are going to be the OEMs. Why? I mean, they've been in business. They know how to do this. Okay, you know, building a vehicle is not all that simple. And even if you look at Tesla, you know, how long have they been around now? It's over 15 years. When did Tesla put out the first Roadster? I mean, you know, 15 years ago or whatever. So, it's not just instantaneously out of Silicon Valley. This is a difficult business. And so I don't know. It's been very refreshing, very informative. I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Well, thank you all for a great discussion. Thanks to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, and more. Ask your smart speaker to play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thanks for listening or watching, and please stay safe.